Hey everybody, my name is Mark Wessels and welcome to the Rudiment module from the Fresh Approach digital series. If you're here and you're just getting started, you probably are here because you had a teacher tell you that rudiments are really important that you learn, or you're just here because you've heard about the rudiments and you want it to get started with it. In this video, I'm going to talk about what the rudiments are, a little bit of the history of how the rudiment list came to be, and then I'll talk about my own rudimental learning sequence. So in basic format, a rudiment is the basics, the fundamentals of the stroke motions that we use in all drumming. So as we move our sticks and we play a lot of patterns, there are definite stroke types and stroke motions that dictate how we play. So you might know the original 13 rudiments, or you've heard about the 26 essential rudiments, or more likely, if you're just learning to play now, you know that there is a list from the Percussive Arts Society on the 40 essential rudiments. Now, throughout those rudiments, you're going to learn the basic stroke types or stroke motions that you're going to use in most of drumming. But beyond that, rudiments are our vocabulary. They're our language that we use to communicate. So, for instance, a 5-stroke roll, a flam, a drag. If you don't know those rudiments, then when you're going to read music or play music in a song, then you're not going to know that vocabulary we use to speak to each other. It's very much like learning to read. You can certainly exist as a human on this planet without knowing how to read, but it is a lot easier knowing how to read as you go through life. I think it's really important that you learned a little bit about the history of the rudiments, because most of our Western civilization or Western music, even in symphony orchestras and concert bands, and certainly on the marching field and in drum set, evolved from our history. The rudiments actually evolved from the Swiss drumming styles of the 14th century. They were the first to use drums and fifes to communicate in the battlefield or in camp duties. So they developed the snare drum or the tabor to play these very basic patterns, and everybody could hear that from miles away and immediately know what was being signaled to them. Now, that Swiss drumming tradition proliferated through all of Europe, Western Europe. So the Italians, the Spanish, the Germans, the Dutch, all had their own drumming patterns and music that developed from the Swiss and then eventually to the British as well. So there are certainly a lot of different drumming traditions all over the world. This is very specific to what we know as rudimental drumming from the American point of view. We owe our heritage to the British, who obviously came over and proliferated their music from the drum and fifes of the colonial period. Most of the rudiments that we know of come from those camp duties that were written down in the late 1700s, early 1800s as part of General Washington's army on how to play the drums and fifes. The American style of rudimental drumming in the military evolved as it went from drum and fife, the historic or the ancient drum and fife corps, to the introduction of bugles and the drum and bugle corps. A lot of the manuals or the methods that were written at the time in the early Civil War period started listing the standard exercises or the standard rudiments, as they're now called, to train drummers on how to do that in the military. One of the most prominent books that exists for early American rudimental drumming is Gardner Strube, who wrote a book called Drum and Fife Instructor, get that right, in 1870, and it contained a list of 25 lessons that incorporated the 25 rudiments that were known at the time. Now, two very prominent teachers in 1933, George Lawrence Stone and William F. Ludwig, established a group, an organization called the National Association of Rudimental Drummers. Now we know this as NARD, National Association of Rudimental Drummers, NARD, and they got together and basically organized the rudiments into categories. Instead of the lessons as they went through the Strube book, they put them into roll rudiments and flam rudiments and drag rudiments. Not as categorized as P.A.S, but they basically took that 25 rudiments that Strube had in the late 1800s, and in 1933 came up with the 13 essential rudiments, and then realizing that that didn't incorporate everything that they needed to know, they added another 13 as supplemental rudiments, which founded the 26 standard rudiments. So the NARD 26 was the standard for many years as it went through the military, and then eventually in John Philip Sousa's bands and drum and bugle corps that started up, and then eventually DCI. Obviously the rudiments and rudimental style drumming started to evolve. A couple of very important instructors, Charles Wilcoxon and J.S. Pratt, were some of the early really important authors and teachers that started having variations to rudiments. Then, of course, with DCI, Drum Corps International, rudiments evolved even more as it went from just a basic set of vocabulary to now playing along with music and to really expanding what drummers did on the marching field. So the P.A.S. 40 Essential Rudiments, basically what happened in 1984, Jay Wanamaker and the marching committee from the Percussive Arts Society got together and said, you know what, we need to revise this. We need to add some more rudiments to this list. So they came up with the original 26 and then added 14 more that were being used commonly in the drum corps and the rudimental solo world at that time in 84. And then that became the 40 essential P.A.S. rudiments. Of course, rudiments have never stopped evolving as we've gone through. Even probably before that P.A.S. rudiment chart, it almost was already obsolete because we were playing all kinds of different rudiments and hybrid rudiments and variations to rudiments because we were making music on the snare drums and not just playing beats, and certainly not limited to camp duties and military drumming styles. So again, if you're just starting on the rudiments, you might be wondering, with all of that history, why do I even need to learn the rudiments? Well, as I said, the rudiments contain those very basic styles, stroke styles that you're going to learn, whether you're playing drum set, whether you're in the concert band, or you want to actually play in a marching band, in a competitive marching band, or any marching band for that matter. So the biggest thing that I want to do with this rudimental learning sequence is to eliminate the rudiments that are redundant, that basically are all of the same rudiments. So for instance, if you learn the 5-stroke roll, and that's one of the fundamental essential rudiments, you can automatically play a lot of the other roll rudiments. So you really don't need 40 rudiments. So almost every rudiment is what I call a gateway rudiment to learning a bunch of others that use the same stroke techniques. So what I'm doing in the tiered system is I'm breaking down the most fundamental stroke styles, stroke motions, and techniques. So that way, you learn that fundamental rudiment and technique, so you're learning a little bit of the vocabulary, but then you're also learning that stroke motion. That way you can apply it to the next rudiment, to the next rudiment, to the next rudiment. So I would not recommend you learn the rudiments starting at the P.A.S. list on number 1 and working your way down through all 40, because you're going to severely waste some time, and then you're going to learn things out of order. It certainly makes a lot more sense to learn a stroke style and then apply it to a rudiment, and then apply all of the other rudiments to the styles or the motions that you've just learned. So with my rudimental learning sequence, I've divided it up into 3 tiers. Tier number 1 is the 6 rudiments that are most fundamental to everything that we do as a drummer. I would go so far as to say that if you can't play those 6 rudiments, you're going to have a very hard time being a drummer at all. A marching drummer, for certain, a middle school drummer in concert band, or a drum set player. Learning those 6 fundamental rudiments in tier number 1 is going to propel you to being able to learn the rudiments in tier number 2. So tier number 2, I have 7 basic rudiments. Again, each rudiment has a very specific skill, and I have a very specific reason why they are in the order that they are. As you work your way through those tiers, I'm going to tell you, this rudiment is a gateway. Once you've learned this, you've got that down, now you can learn that, and that. And that will make learning the other rudiments very quick and very fast and very efficient. So after you've worked your way through tier number 2, you're a pretty good intermediate drummer. I would say that you're ready for almost any high school marching band. You have really, really good fundamental technique that you can use on drum set and applies to a lot of other percussion instruments. Tier 3 is really set aside for those serious rudimental players who want to be in a competitive marching drum line, want to play solo literature, and even some very serious concert solo literature requires some of these techniques. Or if you're a drum set player that really wants to develop a lot of chops and a lot of extended techniques that kind of blend some of the stroke motions that you've learned in the first 2 tiers. So that tier 3, not necessary. I have my original 13 in tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 3 just adds those extra rudiments that become really difficult, just so that we can complete the list of 40. So as a percussion teacher, I will say that I think almost all of the rudiments on the 40 P.A.S. list are really, really important to learn. Not only for just the fun of learning the rudiments, but also to develop that vocabulary, almost like learning the major scales if you are a wind player or if you play keyboard. Learning your major scales is not necessary for you to be able to play music, but it sure does help. So same way with rudiments. If you learn the vocabulary and you can play the 5 and the 7 and the 9 and the 10 and the 11 and the 13 and the 15 and the 17 stroke roll by learning one roll rudiment, then why not go ahead and do it? That way when you see it printed in music, you can just read right through it, and it's just part of the vocabulary you use that you can speak to other drummers with. So I hope you'll spend some time going through the lessons on each one of the rudiments. Some of them seem self-explanatory because you can look at the notes on the page and figure out what it's supposed to do. But if you go through the lessons, you'll get my concepts of stroke motions and how to play the rudiments, not only at a very beginning level, understanding the fundamentals, but also how to play it faster and apply some intermediate and advanced techniques to even the easy rudiments. As you work through the rudiments, really try to master each one at a very basic level before you move to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think you're going to have a lot of fun, and I think you're going to really enjoy this journey that we call rudimental drumming.